March 17, 1943. Berlin was still standing. German armies still occupied Europe. U-boats still prowled the Atlantic. Yet on this day, buried inside a classified intelligence report, a German admiral realized the war was already mathematically lost. Not because of tanks, not because of generals, but because somewhere in Michigan, a factory was producing bombers faster than Germany could destroy them. This is not a story about a battle. It is a story about a number, 1 bomber per hour, and why ideology could not survive arithmetic. On March 17, 1943, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of Germany's military intelligence service, the Abwehr, reviewed a report compiled from agents, industrial analysts, and intercepted economic data. It did not describe troop movements. It did not describe weapons. It described production. According to the report, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant near Detroit was approaching a sustained output of 1 consolidated B-24 Liberator bomber per hour. Not in theory, in practice. Canaris understood what this meant instantly. Germany could shoot down aircraft. It could not shoot down factories. Even worse, German industry could not replicate this scale. Aircraft in the Reich were still built in dispersed plants by skilled craftsmen in semi-custom processes. Willow Run was different. It was automobile logic applied to war. Canaris forwarded the analysis upward. Inside the Reich, facts began their slow collision with belief. Inside Nazi leadership, the report was dismissed almost immediately. Hermann Goering openly mocked such claims, insisting American industry lacked discipline and technical skill. Hitler himself rejected the numbers outright. He believed Germany's racial ideology guaranteed superior efficiency and creativity. This was not ignorance, it was conviction. German industry had been optimized for precision, not volume. Aircraft were masterpieces, not products. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, understood the danger better than most. He did not laugh. But even Speer believed American production figures were exaggerated for propaganda. The Reich had survived shortages before. What Nazi leadership failed to grasp was that the United States was not merely mobilizing industry, it was reorganizing civilization itself around output. Factories replaced battlefields as the true front line. By rejecting Canaris's data, the regime chose ideology over logistics, and in war, logistics always wins.
Willow Run was not designed like a traditional aircraft plant. Architect Albert Kahn built it as an inverted L, stretching over 3.5 million square feet, nearly 1 mile from end to end. Ford Motor Company financed its construction and leased it to the U.S. government. An airfield ran alongside it, so finished bombers could take off immediately. At peak production, more than 42,000 workers filled the line. Men, women, immigrants, and minorities the Nazi worldview dismissed as inferior. Each B-24 did not take 1 hour to build. It took nearly 2 weeks from start to finish. But once the line reached full flow, 1 bomber rolled off the end every 60 minutes. This distinction mattered to engineers and terrified intelligence officers. Willow Run was not faster because Americans were superior. It was faster because the system was.
By early April 1943, the Abwehr began cross-checking the Willow Run data through independent channels. Neutral observers in Sweden, economic attachés in Switzerland, and intercepted shipping manifests all pointed to the same conclusion. American aircraft production was not slowing, it was accelerating. Rail traffic around Detroit surged, aluminum imports climbed. Engine shipments from Pratt & Whitney and Ford's own plants moved on predictable schedules. These were not rumors, they were patterns. The Abwehr calculated attrition rates. Even if German flak and fighters destroyed hundreds of bombers each month, replacement rates outpaced losses. This was the first time German intelligence modeled a war they could not mathematically win. Canaris did not describe defeat, he described inevitability. Inside the intelligence community, officers stopped asking if the Allies could overwhelm German defenses and began asking when. Outside the Abwehr, no one wanted to hear the answer.
In February 1944, Operation Argument, known as Big Week, confirmed what the March 1943 report had predicted. For 6 consecutive days, American and British bombers struck German aircraft factories, airfields, and assembly plants in daylight. The Luftwaffe responded and bled. German fighters rose to meet the formations, but for every bomber shot down, more appeared the next day. The sky itself became a ledger. Willow Run and its sister plants replaced losses faster than Germany could train pilots or manufacture engines. German intelligence officers recognized the pattern immediately. This was not a temporary surge, it was systemic dominance. By Big Week's end, the Luftwaffe's experienced pilot corps was shattered. What Canaris had foreseen on paper now burned across German cities. Production math had become battlefield reality.
The greatest contradiction for Nazi leadership was not American steel, it was American labor. Willow Run functioned because it ignored racial hierarchy. Women installed control panels, immigrants operated heavy machinery, African Americans worked alongside white Americans. Efficiency came from inclusion, not purity. German industry, constrained by forced labor, ideological distrust, and political interference, could not replicate this model. Speer attempted reforms, standardization, dispersal, simplified designs, but it was too late. Germany had optimized craftsmanship, America had optimized throughput. The war's outcome was no longer decided by tactics or courage, but by systems that converted raw material into aircraft faster than ideology could adapt. The Reich had chosen belief over evidence. Willow Run chose output. Only one of those choices could survive total war.
By mid-1943, Wilhelm Canaris understood that his reports had crossed an invisible line. Intelligence officers inside the Abwehr no longer debated American production. They debated how openly it could be discussed. Each new assessment confirmed the same conclusion. Allied output exceeded Germany's capacity to respond. But the Reich had entered a phase where facts themselves were suspect. To acknowledge industrial inferiority was to challenge the Führer's worldview. Canaris did not oppose Hitler openly. He did something more dangerous. He continued to record reality. This quiet insistence placed him under suspicion. The SS began monitoring the Abwehr. Files disappeared. Conversations ended abruptly when officers entered rooms. The problem was no longer whether Germany could win the war. The problem was who would be blamed for saying it could not.
Albert Speer reached his own conclusions through a different path. By late 1943, Germany's aircraft output had increased, but losses increased faster. Factories rebuilt, only to be bombed again. Skilled workers were replaced by forced laborers. Production graphs rose, then flattened. Speer later admitted that the war's decisive mistake was underestimating American industrial capacity. Even Germany's reforms, simplified aircraft designs, centralized control, could not close the gap. The Allies did not need perfect bombing accuracy. They only needed to keep the pressure constant. Every month confirmed what Canaris had seen a year earlier.
The Reich was fighting an opponent that treated war as an engineering problem and solved it. The collapse was not sudden. It was cumulative. By 1944, German civilians no longer needed reports to understand what was happening. They could see it. Day after day, bomber formations crossed the sky in numbers that defied explanation. Even when losses were heavy, replacements arrived immediately. German pilots began reporting the same phenomenon: endless aircraft, identical silhouettes, precise formations. This was not superiority in tactics, it was superiority in supply. The sky itself had become an audit of American production. Each raid validated the March 17, 1943 report without a single word. Inside Germany, the war no longer felt winnable, it felt pre-calculated. The factories in Michigan were closer to Berlin than the Eastern Front, and they were advancing faster.
By early 1944, Wilhelm Canaris had effectively been sidelined. He remained head of the Abwehr in name, but authority drained away quietly. Operational control shifted to the SS. Intelligence reports were rewritten before reaching Hitler. Canaris was no longer dangerous because of what he knew, but because he remembered what had been true. Within Nazi leadership, optimism was mandatory. To speak in numbers was to invite suspicion. Canaris withdrew, aware that survival now depended on silence. Yet the evidence he had collected could not be erased. The Reich's intelligence failure was not a lack of information, it was the deliberate rejection of it. The war was still being fought, but its outcome was no longer debated in honest rooms.
By mid-1944, production figures told a story too large to conceal. The United States produced over 18,000 B-24 Liberators alone, more than Germany produced of all heavy bombers combined. Willow Run reached peak output, while new American plants replicated its methods nationwide. Germany, despite heroic efforts, could not replace aircraft, engines, and trained crews at the same rate. Losses accumulated. Recovery slowed. This was not defeat by invasion. It was defeat by comparison. Every Allied aircraft over Germany represented dozens more already in transit from American factories. The Reich no longer faced an enemy army. It faced an industrial civilization at war. By then, even denial had limits.
In April 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, Wilhelm Canaris was executed at Flossenburg concentration camp. He was not killed for losing the war. He was killed for understanding it. By then, Willow Run had already proven his conclusions correct thousands of times over. The factory outlived the regime that dismissed it. Canaris's March 17, 1943 report survived only in fragments, but its implications had unfolded exactly as predicted. Germany did not lose because of a single battle or betrayal. It lost because it chose belief over measurement. The war ended not with a revelation, but with confirmation.
What Willow Run represented was larger than a single factory. Across the United States, similar principles spread: standardization, flow production, redundancy. Aircraft plants multiplied. Shipyards launched Liberty ships faster than submarines could sink them. The United States did not simply mobilize for war. It reorganized its economy around scale. President Franklin Roosevelt called it the arsenal of democracy, but to engineers and planners, it was something more specific. It was the conversion of civilian industry into a continuous output machine. Germany had prepared for a short war of decision. America prepared for a long war of replacement. By the time the Reich recognized this difference, it no longer mattered how bravely German forces fought. They were being outproduced faster than they could adapt.
General Omar Bradley later summarized the war with a simple observation: professionals talk logistics. The Allies did not win because they were flawless. They won because their systems absorbed mistakes. Lost aircraft were replaced. Lost crews were retrained. Germany's strategy depended on decisive victories. America's strategy depended on inevitability. Once Willow Run and its counterparts reached full capacity, tactical brilliance became secondary. The war's center of gravity shifted away from the front lines and into supply chains. Battles still mattered, but they no longer decided the outcome. Production did. By 1944, the war was no longer being fought to win. It was being fought to confirm the result.
The phrase, 1 bomber per hour, was often misunderstood. It did not mean speed. It meant certainty. Each ABR represented a system operating without pause, day and night, regardless of losses. For German intelligence, this was the moment the war ceased to be theoretical. An enemy that could replace destruction faster than it could be inflicted was unbeatable under existing conditions. That was the realization on March 17, 1943. The report did not predict surrender dates or battlefield collapse. It predicted endurance, and endurance decided the war. The numbers did not shout. They waited, and eventually, they were proven right.
When the war ended, Willow Run did not disappear. The factory that once produced bombers every hour transitioned back to civilian life. General Motors expanded it in the 1950s, increasing its footprint to nearly 5 million square feet. The assembly lines that had overwhelmed the Third Reich became part of America's post-war industrial boom. For the workers who built the bombers, women, immigrants, and first-generation citizens, the factory represented more than victory. It represented belonging. Many had earned skills, wages, and citizenship through wartime labor. The system that Nazi ideology rejected had proven decisive. Willow Run's legacy was not just production, it was inclusion as a force multiplier.
Historians often debate when World War II was lost for Germany. Some point to Stalingrad, others to Normandy. But for intelligence officers and planners, the answer came earlier. By late 1941, the United States had entered the war. By early 1943, its industrial systems were fully engaged. From that point on, the outcome depended not on bravery or sacrifice, but on time. Germany could still fight. It could still inflict damage. What it could no longer do was catch up. The war's end date became a variable. The result did not.
The Third Reich did not lose because it lacked intelligence. It lost because it refused to accept it. Reports were accurate, numbers were clear, but ideology demanded disbelief. A system that values loyalty over truth cannot correct itself. Willow Run exposed this flaw relentlessly. Every bomber in the sky contradicted Nazi racial theory. Every successful raid undermined claims of German industrial superiority. The Reich did not collapse from a single error. It collapsed from accumulated denial. When belief replaced measurement, adaptation became impossible. And in modern war, adaptation is survival.
On March 17, 1943, no bombs fell in Berlin. No armies advanced. Yet the war's fate shifted all the same. A single intelligence report captured what would take 2 more years of fighting to prove. It did not predict collapse. It predicted imbalance. When one side can replace destruction faster than the other can endure it, the outcome becomes fixed. That sheet of paper did not end the war. It foretold it. Everything that followed merely fulfilled the math. By the time Berlin fell, the war had already been lost thousands of hours earlier, one bomber at a time. World War II is often remembered for its battles, but it was decided by blueprints, schedules, and output.
Willow Run was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a system, and systems endure longer than armies. The Allies did not simply win the war. They built a structure that made losing impossible. That is why March 17, 1943 matters. It marks the moment reality overtook belief, when the war became unwinnable, not in theory, but in practice. History does not always turn on gunfire. Sometimes it turns on a factory floor in Michigan every hour on the hour.